Hi, my name is Holly, and today we are going to do a one-part tumbler mold. This is the tumbler that we're going to make right here. We are going to pour it just like this, upside down. There are no undercuts. An example of an undercut would be like this tumbler here. With this one, if we're looking at it, we're looking straight down as to the plaster being poured over the top. So look at this one. By running my finger up along the sides, the tip of my finger will disappear. That tells me that there's an undercut and the clay object is going to get locked into the plaster. Here, the plaster and this clay object are going to separate from each other cleanly. When we made this tumbler, we threw it extra thick so it would be heavy and it would not float into the plaster when we pour it. We've let it get to a leather hard stage, so it's like cheddar cheese, and that way, if it was too dry, it would crack when we poured the plaster over the top. If it was too wet, it would mush and cave in on itself. We're going to pour on top of this countertop surface here. It's smoother. If we were pouring on top of this wood here, chances are that the mold would get stuck. The plaster that we pour would get stuck to it. This nice good surface here will make for a clean removal of the plaster. I'm going to take a small amount of water, put it on the lip of the cup. Adhere that to the countertop. Let that seal in. I'm going to assemble 4 cottle boards and 4 clamps around the side of this. I'm going to seal the cottle boards, edges and the seams with clay coils, and we're going to pour our plaster. Okay, got the last of the coils going in here. I've coiled the outside edges, I've coiled the inside bottom edges, and the inside sides. I've pressed the clay firmly up to make a good seal so that no plaster will pour out. I'm looking to do a plaster pour of about 1 inch above the object. I'm also going to do a quick mold soap on the edge of the wooden cottle boards. The countertop, being that it's plastic, doesn't need any mold soap, and neither does our clay leather hard object. I'm putting in just 1 layer of mold soap, making sure that it doesn't pool on the bottom. We're going to let that mold soap set up for about 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and we're going to pour the plaster. For pouring the plaster in, I want to make sure I don't pour directly on the object. I'm trying to alleviate as many bubbles as I can by pouring over my hand. Because it's such a tight space, it's difficult to have a perfect pour right into there. I've got all the plaster poured in. Doing a check of the level of the plaster against the cup. And we've got a good inch, 1.25 inches there, so that's great. We're going to let it cure. And we've got this separate bucket on the side to wash our hands so that we don't let the plaster go down the drain and clog up the drain. Okay, our plaster is cured, fully set up. We're removing the clamps and the cottles. We're going to do a cleanup on this mold. We're going to clean up these sharp edges here, these little points here. If this plaster, these sharp edges, if we didn't clean them up, it's possible that they could break off into our clay object and cause plaster pop-outs. We're going to remove it from the laminate topping. That's our tumbler mold. We're going to allow the plaster to dry. And it's ready to slip cast or press mold. So to clean up the edges, we'll just take this fetal knife. You can also use a Surform to smooth things out. Take a green scrubby and give it one last polish smooth. When we pull the tumbler out, we want to be really cautious as to not disturb this line here, this lip. That eventually we'll want a really nice sharp edge for our casting. And there's our tumbler. I'm going to do a quick inside. I want to make sure there's no undercut in there as well, sharpening that edge. Then we're going to allow this to fully dry, making sure all the water has left it, and it'll be ready for casting. I'll probably do a clean out with the sponge in here as well. And there we go, one-piece tumbler mold.